You know what's funny? They're still trying to figure you out, still sitting there with their little frameworks and their neat categories, and they're this type of person does that logic, wondering why none of it works on you. They've been watching, longer than you think, studying you like you're some kind of puzzle they just haven't solved yet. Like if they stare long enough, analyze hard enough, apply the right formula, you'll finally make sense. But you won't. You never will. Not to them. Because every box they tried to put you in, it shattered. Every label they tried to stick on you, it fell off. Every explanation they came up with, it collapsed the moment they tested it against reality. And now they're just watching. Silent, confused, unable to look away, but completely unable to understand what they're looking at. You broke something in their system, something they relied on to make the world predictable, something they needed to feel in control. And the best part? You didn't even try. You just existed. And that was enough to short-circuit everything they thought they knew. So let's talk about what happens when you become unexplainable, when you stop fitting, when the whole world is trying to label you and every single category breaks. They started simple, with the obvious labels. The surface level categories everyone uses to sort people into manageable groups. Are you confident or insecure? Strong or weak? Leader or follower? They watched how you moved through spaces, how you spoke, how you carried yourself, and they waited for the signs, the telltale indicators that would let them file you away under a familiar heading. But the signs didn't match up. You had the presence of someone confident, but none of the need for attention, the discipline of someone driven, but none of the anxiety, the calmness of someone secure, but none of the arrogance. You were contradicting their checklist, and contradictions make people nervous, so they dug deeper. They looked for the motivation, the why behind what you do. Are you seeking approval, validation, power, recognition? They studied your patterns, what you respond to, what you ignore, what makes you move, and what leaves you unmoved. And again, nothing added up. You didn't light up when praised. You didn't deflate when criticized. You didn't chase when attention was withheld. You didn't perform when eyes were on you. Their formulas were failing, because formulas require predictability, and you weren't predictable in any way they understood. That's when they started getting uncomfortable, because people don't know what to do with what they can't categorize. Categories are safety. Categories mean you can anticipate someone's next move. Categories let you feel superior without actually having to understand. But you weren't playing the game they knew. You weren't following the patterns they recognized. You weren't reacting in the ways they could predict and control. So they did what people always do when their maps stop working. They blamed the map on you. You must be hiding something, they thought. Everyone hides something. Maybe you're just better at performing than most. Maybe this is all rehearsed. Maybe if we watch long enough, the mask will slip. So they watched longer, waited for the inconsistency, the moment where the real you would leak through and prove that this whole thing was an act. But the moment never came. You were the same when people were watching as when they weren't. The same when you were winning as when you were losing. The same when you were alone as when you were in a crowd. There was no mask to slip, because you weren't wearing one. And that broke everything they thought they understood about how people work. See, their entire understanding of the world depends on one fundamental assumption, that everyone is performing, that everyone has a public self and a private self, that everyone adjusts based on who's watching. But you didn't adjust. You didn't shift. You didn't become someone else depending on the room. You were just you, consistently, unwaveringly, without variation. And consistency without performance, That's not something their system can process. Because if you're not performing, then you're not controllable. If you're not adjusting, then you're not influencingable. If you're not changing based on feedback, then feedback has no power over you. And people who rely on control, they need feedback to have power. They need your reactions, they need your adjustments, they need proof that their approval or disapproval moves you. When they couldn't get that proof, when nothing they did seemed to shift you even slightly, they stopped trying to understand you, and they started just watching. Watching with this mix of confusion and fascination and something that almost looks like fear. Not fear of what you might do, fear of what you represent. The possibility that their entire way of reading people is incomplete, that their categories are insufficient, that their formulas don't work on everyone. You became the exception that broke the rule, the anomaly that exposed the limitation of the system. And now they don't know what to do with you except observe from a distance, hoping that eventually you'll do something that makes sense to them. But you won't, because you were never trying to make sense to them in the first place. They had expectations. Of course they did. Because expectations are how people maintain control over a world that's inherently chaotic. When they saw your discipline, they expected ego. Because in their experience, disciplined people need you to know how disciplined they are. They perform their routines. They broadcast their sacrifices. They make sure everyone sees the work. But you didn't do that. You just did the work. Quietly, consistently, without announcement. And when there was no performance, no broadcasting, no need for witnesses, they didn't know what to do with it. Discipline without ego? That doesn't compute. That's not how the formula works. When they saw your confidence, they expected arrogance. Because in their world, confident people need to prove it. They dominate conversations. They assert superiority. They make sure you know they're important. But you didn't dominate. You didn't assert. You didn't make yourself big to make others small. You just existed with a quiet certainty that didn't need validation. And that was somehow more powerful than any performance could be. Confidence without arrogance? Impossible, they thought. Everyone who's sure of themselves needs you to know it. But you proved them wrong just by being. When they saw your boundaries, they expected hostility. Because people who set boundaries are supposed to be defensive, right? Guarded, cold, building walls to keep others out. But your boundaries weren't walls. They were just clarity. A simple understanding of what you will and won't accept. No anger, no explanation, no apology. Just a calm, clear line that didn't need defending because it was non-negotiable. Boundaries without hostility? That confused them. Because they're used to boundaries being emotional, reactive, something you fight about. But you didn't fight, you just held the line. And holding a line without emotion is somehow more final than any argument. They expected you to need something from them. Everyone needs something, right? Approval, validation, connection, recognition, something. So they waited to see what you'd reach for, what you'd chase, what you'd compromise yourself to obtain. And you reached for nothing. You didn't chase their approval. You didn't need their validation. You didn't seek their recognition. You didn't compromise yourself for access to their circles. You were complete without them. And completeness without external validation is the most threatening thing in the world to people who built their worth on being needed. They expected you to break eventually. Because everyone breaks under enough pressure, right? Everyone has a limit. Everyone cracks when pushed hard enough. So they watched for the signs. The fatigue, the frustration, the moment where you'd snap or fold or show that underneath it all, you're just as fragile as everyone else. but you didn't break. You didn't even bend. Not because you're rigid, but because you're rooted. And there's a difference. Rigid things snap under pressure. Rooted things stay grounded. You weren't resisting the pressure. You were just unmoved by it. Like wind hitting a mountain. The mountain doesn't fight the wind, it just remains. And your remaining, your absolute unwillingness to be moved by forces that move everyone else, that's what finally made them stop trying. See, they realized something that made them deeply uncomfortable. You're not playing hard to get. You're not playing aloof. You're not playing any game at all. You're just genuinely, authentically, completely self-contained. You don't need external sources to feel whole. You don't need validation to know your value. You don't need approval to move forward. You are internally sovereign, and sovereignty doesn't negotiate. That's what they're staring at. Not success, not confidence, not strength. Sovereignty. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that doesn't perform. The kind that just exists and refuses to be anything other than what it is. And here's what really gets them. Here's what keeps them up at night, replaying interactions, trying to find the crack, the flaw, the weakness. You're not trying to be impressive. You're not trying to be intimidating. You're not trying to be anything. You're just aligned, integrated, whole. And wholeness in a world of fragmented people is the most destabilizing force there is, because fragmented people need you to be fragmented too. They need you to have contradictions. They need you to have weaknesses they can exploit. They need you to have needs they can use as leverage. But you don't. And without leverage, they have no power. Without needs, they have no hooks. Without contradictions, they have no angles. You're a closed system, complete, impenetrable, not through hostility, but through integration. And integration is something they can observe, but never manipulate. That's why they're still watching, still trying, still hoping that eventually something will make sense, but it won't. Because you're not a puzzle to be solved. You're just a person who became whole. And wholeness doesn't need to be understood, it just is. Let's talk about what actually happened here. Let's break down the moment their entire system collapsed. Because this isn't just about you confusing a few people. This is about you breaking the fundamental operating system they use to navigate reality. Their system works like this. Observe behavior, identify patterns, apply labels, predict outcomes, maintain control. It's efficient, it's reliable, it works on 99% of people, but you're the 1%, the exception, the error in the code. They observed your behavior. That part worked fine. They saw what you did, how you moved, how you responded. They identified patterns. Still working. You were consistent, predictable in your consistency. They tried to apply labels, and this is where the system started glitching. Strong? Yes, but not aggressive. Confident? Yes, but not performative. Independent? Yes, but not isolated. Disciplined? Yes, but not rigid. Every label they applied came with contradictions. Every category they tried to use had exceptions. Nothing fit cleanly. So they moved to step 4, predict outcomes. If we praise them, they'll lean in. If we criticize them, they'll defend. If we ignore them, they'll seek attention. If we challenge them, they'll prove themselves. Except, none of that happened. Praise didn't make you lean in. Criticism didn't make you defend. Ignoring didn't make you seek. Challenging didn't make you prove. You just continued, unchanged, unaffected, unmoved. And that's when the system completely failed. Because if they can't predict your behavior, they can't control your outcomes. And if they can't control your outcomes, you're operating outside their influence. That's terrifying to people who built their identity on being influential. They tried adjusting the formula. Maybe you respond to different stimuli. Maybe you need a different approach. Maybe the pattern is just more complex than usual. So they tried everything. Respect, disrespect, inclusion, exclusion, attention, neglect, opportunity, obstacle. And every single attempt produced the same result: nothing. You remained exactly who you were, regardless of external manipulation. That's when they realized they weren't dealing with complexity. They were dealing with immunity. You're immune to the tactics that work on everyone else, not because you're trying to resist them, but because you genuinely don't register them as relevant to your internal state. See, their system assumes everyone is externally referenced, that everyone checks the room before deciding how to feel, that everyone adjusts based on feedback. But you're internally referenced. You check yourself before deciding how to feel. You adjust based on alignment, not feedback. And internal reference points, those aren't accessible to external manipulation. There's no button they can push, no lever they can pull, no angle they can work. You're a closed loop, self-sustaining, self-correcting, self-validating. And closed loops don't need anything from the outside to maintain themselves. That's the moment they gave up trying to understand and started just watching, because watching is all they can do when the system fails. But here's what makes this even more destabilizing for them. It's not just that their system failed on you, it's that you exposed the limitations of the system itself. Because if their framework can't account for you, what else is it missing? If their categories don't work on you, who else slips through? If their predictions fail with you, how many other predictions are wrong? You became living proof that their map is incomplete, that their understanding is insufficient, that their control is an illusion. And people don't like having their illusions shattered, especially illusions they've built their entire sense of superiority on. Some of them responded by mythologizing you, turning you into something larger than life, something special, something rare. Because if you're extraordinary, then the system isn't flawed. You're just an exception, an outlier, a statistical anomaly that doesn't disprove the rule. That's more comfortable than admitting the system is incomplete. Others responded by distancing themselves, quiet withdrawal, less engagement, not out of anger but out of discomfort. Because being near you requires them to confront the limits of their thinking. And most people would rather avoid that confrontation. And then there are the few who actually get it, who understand what they're looking at. These are the people who don't try to label you, don't try to explain you, don't try to reduce you to something manageable. They just observe, adjust, learn. They recognize that you're not trying to be superior. You're just demonstrating what's possible when someone stops negotiating with fear, when someone stops fragmenting themselves to fit, when someone chooses integration over acceptance. These people don't feel threatened by you, they feel inspired. Because inspiration doesn't require comprehension. But most people aren't there yet. Most people are still stuck in the watching phase, still trying to make you make sense. Still waiting for the moment where you'll finally be explainable. And you know what? Let them watch. Let them try. Let them wait. Because you're not here to be understood. You're here to be yourself. And being yourself doesn't require an audience, approval, or explanation. It just requires you to keep showing up as exactly who you are, consistently, unapologetically, without adjustment. The system will keep failing, the categories will keep breaking, the labels will keep falling off, and they'll keep watching, because they can't look away from something they can't explain. That's not your problem, that's just proof that you're doing something right. So let's talk about what you actually are, not what they think you are, not what they're trying to make you, what you actually are. You're integrated. That's the word they don't have. That's the concept they're missing. That's the thing their system can't process. Integration. Most people are fragmented. They have a work self and a home self, a public self and a private self, a self they show when they're confident, and a self they hide when they're not. They adjust constantly based on context, based on who's watching, based on what's expected. That's not bad. That's normal. That's how most people survive in a world that demands constant adaptation. But you didn't stay fragmented. Somewhere along the way, you integrated. You became the same person in every context, the same values in every situation, the same truth regardless of audience. And integration creates coherence, a wholeness that doesn't shift based on external pressure. That's what they're looking at. That's what they can't understand. That's what breaks their categories. Because fragmented people are predictable. You can influence one fragment without affecting the others. You can exploit contradictions. You can create leverage. But integrated people, there's no gap to exploit, no contradiction to leverage, no fragment to influence independently. You're one solid thing, and solid things don't break under pressure. They just remain. Here's what integration actually means in practice. It means your private behavior matches your public behavior. You're not performing integrity, you're living it. What you do when no one's watching is the same as what you do when everyone is. It means your words match your actions. You don't say one thing and do another. You don't preach standards. You don't live by. You don't demand from others what you don't demand from yourself. It means your values stay consistent across contexts. You don't abandon your principles when they become inconvenient. You don't compromise your truth to fit in. You don't adjust your standards based on who's in the room. That kind of consistency creates a gravitational field. People can feel it even if they can't name it. And here's what integration gives you that fragmentation never can. Certainty, not arrogance. Certainty. You're certain of who you are because there's no internal conflict. No part of you fighting another part. No contradiction creating doubt. You know what you stand for because you stand for the same thing everywhere. You know what you value because you demonstrate it consistently. You know who you are because you're the same person in every circumstance. That certainty is magnetic. It draws people in even as it confuses them. Because most people are so used to inconsistency that consistency feels almost supernatural. You're certain of your boundaries because they're based on your values, not on your mood. They don't shift based on how you're feeling that day. They don't disappear when you want to be liked. You're certain of your decisions because they come from alignment, not from reaction. You're not deciding based on what will make others comfortable. You're deciding based on what's true for you. You're certain of your path because it's yours, not borrowed, not copied, not performed, yours. And that kind of certainty doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be defensive. It doesn't need to be proven. It just exists. Quiet, steady, immovable. That's what they see when they look at you. That's what unsettles them. That's what they can't categorize. Certainty without arrogance. Strength without dominance. Presence without performance. You're not trying to be impressive. You're just not trying to be anything other than what you are. And in a world where everyone is trying to be something, just being is revolutionary. You don't need their approval because you have your own. You don't need their validation because you're internally validated. You don't need their understanding because you understand yourself. That's freedom, real freedom. The kind that doesn't shout or perform or prove. The kind that just is. And here's what they're really struggling with. Here's what keeps them watching even though they can't understand. You're proof that another way exists. That you don't have to fragment yourself to survive. That you don't have to perform to have value. That you don't have to seek external validation to feel whole. You're living evidence that integration is possible. That coherence is achievable. That you can be the same person in every room without apology. And that threatens every compromise they've made. Every time they've adjusted themselves to fit. Every moment they've betrayed their own truth to be accepted. Your existence asks them a question they don't want to answer. If you can do it, why can't they? And that question is uncomfortable, because the answer isn't that they can't, it's that they haven't chosen to. And that means their fragmentation is a choice they're still making. So they watch, and they wonder, and they try to make you make sense within their framework, but you won't, because you're operating from a completely different framework. One they don't have access to because they haven't done the work you've done. You've integrated, and integration can't be faked, can't be performed, can't be borrowed. It has to be lived, chosen, built through 1,000 small decisions to stay aligned, even when it costs you. And you've paid that cost over and over, in moments no one saw, in choices no one applauded. That's why you're whole. That's why you're coherent. That's why their categories break on you. You're not playing their game. You're not following their rules. You're not trying to fit their framework. You're just being, fully, completely, without apology. And being is something they can observe, but never replicate until they're willing to do what you did. Let go of the performance. Embrace the truth. Choose integration over acceptance. Most of them won't, and that's okay, because you're not here to convert them. You're here to be yourself, and yourself is enough, more than enough. It's everything. So what happens now? Now that their categories have broken, now that their system has failed, now that they're just watching, nothing dramatic, no grand finale, no triumphant ending, just continuation. You continue being who you are. They continue trying to understand, and the gap between those two realities continues to exist. Some of them will eventually stop trying. They'll accept that you're unexplainable and move on, not because they understand you, but because they've given up trying to. That's fine. You don't need to be understood. You never did. Others will keep watching from a distance, observing, analyzing, hoping that eventually something will click and you'll make sense. They'll be waiting a long time because you're not trying to make sense to them. You're just trying to stay aligned with yourself. And a very few, will actually learn something from this. They'll see what you represent and feel something shift inside them. Not jealousy, not admiration, recognition. Recognition that they've been fragmenting themselves unnecessarily, that they've been performing when they could have been being, that they've been seeking external validation when they could have been building internal certainty. These people will quietly start their own integration process, not copying you, not trying to become you, just inspired by your example to become more themselves. You won't know who these people are. They won't announce it. They won't thank you. They'll just start making different choices, setting different boundaries, choosing alignment over acceptance. And somewhere down the line, they'll become unexplainable to someone else, and the cycle continues. That's the real impact of what you are, not in the people who watch and wonder, but in the people who watch and wake up. But here's what you need to understand. What you need to hold on to as you move forward. You didn't become integrated to inspire others. You didn't become whole to prove a point. You didn't become coherent to break their system. You did it because fragmentation was killing you, because performing was exhausting you, because external validation was never enough. You integrated because you had to, because staying fragmented would have meant betraying yourself, and you couldn't live with that betrayal anymore. That's the only reason that matters, the only motivation that sustains, the only foundation that lasts. Everything else, the confusion you create, the categories you break, the watching, the wondering, the system failures, all of that is just a side effect of you choosing yourself, consistently, completely, without apology. Don't make it about them. Don't make it about proving anything. Don't make it about being impressive or untouchable or anything else. Make it about alignment. Make it about truth. Make it about being the same person in every context, because that's the only way you can breathe. The watching will continue. They'll keep trying to figure you out, keep trying to make you fit, keep hoping you'll eventually become explainable. Let them. It's not your job to make yourself smaller so they can understand you. It's not your responsibility to fragment yourself so they feel comfortable. Your only job is to stay integrated, to remain whole, to keep choosing alignment, even when it confuses everyone around you. And here's what will happen as you do that. As you continue being exactly who you are without adjustment or apology or explanation, you'll become quieter, not because you have less to say, but because you have less need to say it. You'll become more selective, not because you're being exclusive, but because your energy is valuable and you know it. You'll become more certain, not arrogant, certain. Because every day you choose yourself is another day of proof that you can trust yourself. And that certainty, that quiet, grounded, unshakable certainty, will continue to baffle everyone who's still looking for external validation to feel whole. They'll keep watching. You'll keep being. And the distance between those two realities will remain. Because you're not ahead of them. You're not better than them. You're just facing a different direction. They're still looking outward for answers. You're looking inward. And inward is where integration lives, where coherence builds, where truth exists without needing consensus. That's the difference. That's the gap. That's the thing they see but can't name. So as you move forward, as you continue on this path of being unexplainable to people who need explanations, remember this: you're not a puzzle to be solved. You're not a mystery to be decoded. You're not a category to be filled. You're just a person who chose wholeness over fragmentation, truth over performance, alignment over acceptance. And that choice, that simple, difficult, daily choice, is what makes you untouchable. Not because you're unreachable, but because you're unreachable by anything that doesn't align with your truth. The categories will keep breaking. The labels will keep falling off. The watching will continue. And you'll keep being exactly who you are. Integrated, coherent, whole. Not for them, for you. And that's all that matters.